Almost all the diseases of the 20th century, diseases of civilization, all the cancers, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, suicide, they're all caused by electromagnetic field exposure. Suicide's got a connection with EMF. There are studies 25 years old showing people live near power lines or people live in residences that have high magnetic fields have higher suicide rates. Talk about what dirty electricity is. On this graph here, wavy red line, if you look carefully at it, you get these little tiny bumps. That should be perfectly smooth. If you put current through a high-pass filter and eliminate the 60 cycle stuff and magnify it, you get the blue, jiggly, bumpy stuff is high-frequency transients called dirty electricity and harmonics. And what's causing it in this situation, this bike shop, it was about 20 feet from the base of another cell tower. So I went in and asked the guy if I could measure what was in his shop, but I got over 20,000 units. I measured 4 or 5 other shops in the mall, and they're all high. You see, cell towers, they're plugged into the grid. They operate on alternating current, but the electronics runs on direct current. Devices that change the alternating to direct are called switching power supplies, or switch mode power supplies, or inverters. Same problem with solar and with wind. They don't generate at grid frequency, so they have to change it to match. These cell towers, they interrupt the current flow and inject this dirty electricity back into the grid, contaminating the whole area. And the ground too, because I'm sure these things are grounded. So the ways you make dirty electricity are arcing, like Edison's original generators, arcing and sparking. They're making dirty electricity. Anything that interrupts current flow. Your cell phone charger, every computer in the world's got a switching power supply in it because that stuff runs on direct current. I said, hey, let's look at this childhood leukemia plays out vis-a-vis electrification. We analyzed the association between the percent of homes served by electricity in each state and the childhood leukemia mortality rate. What we saw was just this remarkable pattern. Residences which were electrified go up. The death rate per 100,000 goes up too. When I was doing those studies, couldn't help but look at some of the adult cancers. Here we had childhood leukemia associated with residential electrification. I just picked female breast cancer as a common cancer. It kills a lot of women. It had a 79.9 or 80% association, just like childhood leukemia. Power frequency magnetic fields, the 60 cycle stuff, could be this carcinogenic. I looked at all the other cancers, astonished that all other causes of disease like suicide, diabetes, were strongly related. Edison started New York City electrification in 1882. Most of the cities had electricity by 1900. Average life expectancy in the cities was 8 years less than out in the country. It wasn't just the cancers, I expected them. Cardiovascular disease, diabetes, amazingly. Public Health Service and National Cancer Institute don't want you to know this. They talk about the war on cancer, which is an abysmal failure because they haven't looked at the right things. Here's cardiovascular renal disease. That's not going down, that's going up. The urban rate of diabetes is 66% higher than the rural rate. Electrified versus non-electrified. Suicide, 30% higher. If you look at total death rates, urban, rural, the urban is black, the rural is green. So you see the differences. This is heart disease. Look at the huge differences there. Urban, rural. Here's diabetes. Just enormous differences again. Urban, rural differences, electrified versus non-electrified. Here's suicide. Papers going back 20 years showing electrification and suicide are associated. The old order Amish came over in the 1700s to escape persecution in Europe. They shunned electricity. If you compare the Amish to non-Amish, very low prevalence of cancer. Diabetes, type 2 diabetes. I actually talked to the group at the University of Maryland that studied these people. They just scratched their heads and said, God, their diabetes rates are just terribly low. So I told them it's due to electricity. They just laughed at me. Alzheimer's is low, so is suicide. Cardiovascular disease is low. I found a pediatric practice, which I wrote up in the book, that took care of about 800 to 1,000 Amish families someplace in Indiana, in the Midwest. These are pediatricians. They've never seen a case of ADHD, never seen a case of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder or childhood obesity in any of the Amish kids in their practice. So my hypothesis is that the epidemic of the so-called diseases of civilization aren't caused by lifestyle but by electricity, and I think the active agent is dirty electricity. Half the deaths from all causes in this country is dirty electricity. The statistics are clean. Large proportion of what we call diseases of civilization are preventable. And I'm really worried that another epidemic of diseases is underway caused by modern radio frequency.